if I could have an answer from you, in the past, wouldn't you say that like maybe the most fair definition of good objective morality is the one where the outcome like leads to the most good? I paraphrase it, but did you say something like that in the past?
What does morality have to do with anything if we're all naturally corrupt and that the point of life is to do God's will, while not getting forgiven for not confessing our bad nature to the one responsible for the problem and living for that creator means to be punished forever? Christianity is obviously not about being good to each other, but pleasing God.
Oh,
No, okay. So I must have
so
missed that.
there's
So if I'm a premillennial Christian, so I believe when the Bible says that Jesus will come to establish his kingdom on earth one day, I believe that's a literal interpretation, right? So I guess the idea is that the Bible teaches that one day Jesus will be here on the earth to give out his law. So let's change the argument maybe into that. So that would satisfy the first requirement, right? That a God would officially
no,
come down.
it would satisfy the first requirement if it ever happened. The fact that you believe it's going to happen is irrelevant until it does.
I'll take it even further than that. Why does Sain want Jesus to come down, let alone agree with it? That's my question. The psychology behind the belief is the essence. A belief alone is only a belief. Now, I've edited some of this out, as I'm really only interested in Sain's segment of this video. But the main context of this right now is, quote, divine command theory, which I'm hearing about for the first time now. I'm not interested in evidence that God has commanded anything, but why the Christians agree with any of it. So, I don't understand why these people believe that God's commands are good, as they obviously use the cop-out because he's God, which is invalid because God's being is not a valid reason for anything's goodness. In terms of morality and being good people, how are God's inhumane commands acceptable? And how are Christians moral for accepting them? How can they be humanly moral if they're harmful to people? How does God being God make any of it good? How can God deciding what's good, and how can the changing of his commands make them good?
Yeah.
Okay. So I know it's not fair to play hypothetical, but let's say, if hypothetically like Jesus came down, he established his kingdom on earth, like the Bible says. What would we do then as someone like who very clearly does not believe that his morals are correct?
Why are any of you Christians concerned about any of us who don't believe or agree? God isn't here, only you religious people are, and you're the ones we have to deal with, not God. Are you not actually faithful that Christianity is the truth, so you choose to take the liberty of making us miserable yourself? God existing or not doesn't even matter, because you people agree with this tyranny and sadism, and are the ones preaching, expressing your beliefs, apologizing for this God, and arguing with us.
I don't know what his morals are. I would have to have a big, long discussion.
I would have explained to Sain that Jesus coming down and setting his kingdom up here doesn't matter because Christianity is divided, as there are also other active religions that apply themselves to the world. So their personal understanding of what those morals are or what matter, and why they believe those morals make sense.
So Jesus drowned a bunch of babies then.
And he's okay with slavery, and he doesn't like gay sex.
Ooh.
Yeah, if that guy shows up, the only recourse is rebellion.
Okay. So and
Because
I guess
I'm not going to. If somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I'm okay with slavery," and I'm not okay with people loving who they want to love, that's a person who is not in any way a moral being who cares about humans.
Okay. And I guess, okay, so like if we were to talk about like that whole the greater good, right? Like if we could take Jesus' teachings and the Old Testament teachings and build a society off of it, and if it led to the most like amount of like thriving and like
What would it?
So, Sain just ignores that rant and tries another hypothetical. I would have ignored that nonsense and held his feet to the fire. I'll add that drowning babies, an invalid objection to sexuality, slavery, and rape are not elements of prosperity.
Yeah, well, I won't deny that it says that, without a doubt.
Sain says, I won't deny that here, and I'll first repeat my usual explanation that no laws would be necessary and nobody would ever need to build a society if God simply got over his petty desire for obedience and just created a life that didn't have needs. As for Sain not denying that God is a psycho, that's why I'm all about psychology, questioning the Christians to make them explain themselves, leaving them no room or opportunity to be slippery or evasive. They still do, but that simply requires persistence and holding them to my questioning.
Oh, like it
does.
And like that's the morality. Yeah.
Answer her question. Does that
Yeah.
produce a better society?
Right. You're talking about morality. You're making arguments about what is or isn't a good society, and that if you
What kind of broken God are you worshiping?
Man, he's definitely offensive. Like, I will not deny that. Like, he is a very offensive God. I don't believe that anyone who comes to the Bible honestly can walk away not being offended by his teaching. Like, his ways really are not like.
So do you
like
think this is what
anyone.
society should be like, though? Do you think that this is an ideal society? This is essentially what you're advocating for, which is what I'm trying. You're saying, well, morals come from God, divine command theory, right? Morals come from God. They're prescriptive. They have to be.
He obviously understands the Bible is not a moral code, so the better question would be why he wants such a society, understanding that God is all about himself, which is a very bizarre standard, being objectionable to non-reproducible sexuality. Well, God designed our reproduction, which is a result of Adam and Eve. Rape is a social ill that is psychologically rooted. Nobody would ever need to do any labor if humans didn't have needs. I would also ask why he wants the entire world to conform to his theocratic vision of a society, as Christianity is about the world and not just those who want it.
Yeah, so it's so interesting because Jesus says, and I know you're probably familiar with this, Matt. When Jesus is saying, like, fear not him who has the power to kill the body, but fear him who has the power to kill the body, and then afterward send your soul to hell.
Yeah, except that there's no evidence that we have a soul. There's no evidence of a hell.
Why do you believe in such a morbid and violent passage, Sain? And why do you want the world to also?
How much worse would a God's positions need to be for you to stop being a follower of that God? I mean, if you're okay with a God that's okay with slavery, that's okay with a God that's okay with genocide, okay with a God that's okay with punishing people for picking up sticks or touching a box on the Sabbath, okay with a God that floods an entire planet in order to kill off all these people because he was a miserable failure who couldn't get them to worship and love him. If you're okay with all of that, what the fuck would a God have to do for you to finally give up and say, you know what? This is an immoral thug, whether it exists or not. I don't want anything to do with him. How bad would it have to be?
Man, I guess all I would have to say is, like, Jesus Christ, the God of the Bible, he accepted me. So I'm going to...
No, he didn't.
1. What does Jesus accepting you have to do with Matt's question of how monstrous God would have to be? 2. How is Jesus accepting you a valid reason to follow him? 3. Doesn't that work the other way around? You accepting Jesus in order to avoid hell? If Jesus was the one who does the accepting, he's stripping people of the chance to be forgiven.
So, how did you batter Jesus?
Well, I transgressed his laws.
No, you didn't. You didn't even exist. If Jesus existed at all, you hadn't even been born yet. And you were already guilty even if you never transgressed any laws, because sin is inherited in the doctrine that you accept, right?
How is the act of lawful transgression a form of battery? Violent physical resistance would be, but Jesus isn't on this planet. As Matt points sin out, being that Christian says that we're all born unlawful, which would mean that parents would be the ones battering Jesus, because birth is unlawful, by the unlawful substandard of sin.
Shit. There's nothing I could do to a God. There's nothing I could do to harm a God. There's nothing I could do that would make a God say, you know what, the only solution, Matt's just.
Yeah, well, I'm so thankful that you put in the term like he seems like a monster, because yeah, in my worldview, I don't think he's a monster. As it stands right now under the covenant that he made.
Hal, what's a monster then? What's a
right
monster?
now.
What's a monster? What would somebody have to do to be a monster?
If I did the things that your God sanctions, would I be a monster?
Yeah, you would.
Yes, I would.
It's cognitive dissonance. It's all on. In honesty, it's just.
How can you sit here? No. Now I'm pissed. Now I'm genuinely pissed. How can you sit here and acknowledge that he's a monster and acknowledge its cognitive dissonance and then still stick with it? What is keeping you in belief?
I make exceptions.
No, you don't have to make exceptions. You do not have to. Do you not have to bend on what is right?
But I am. But I don't want to dwell on this one for too long. I guess.
What the fuck do you mean you don't want to dwell on it? You believe this religion is the truth, and you probably try to spread this to other people, getting them to live by your personal insecurities, which cause you to lower yourself to the abysmal substandards of this all-powerful creator that isn't even proven to exist. You are a psychological mess, even if Christianity is the truth, because there is never an excuse to ever accept or approve of this religion.
You don't want to dwell on it. It's incredibly uncomfortable to find out that you're not only buying into something without any evidence, but you're sacrificing your humanity and your moral center in order to keep adhering to something which you know and have admitted is immoral. I wouldn't want to keep talking about it either.
No, I mean, I will keep talking about it if you want. We can keep talking about it. We can.
Well, I don't think we're going to make any progress because what you're saying is God's a dick, but I'm okay with it.
Okay. Well, that's I guess what the next point that I was going to bring up. Yes. Does the Old Testament it's hardcore? It's definitely hardcore. But
the New Testament.
We have.
Why do you think the Old Testament's hardcore? The New Testament is where you get infinite punishment. You don't get that in the Old Testament.
No, and we talked about this before, and yeah, you're right. And that is way more hardcore than that. But I guess the thing is that Jesus commands his disciples, to die for their enemies. He doesn't command us to do the things that we did.
What kind of loving being would command its followers to die?
Why is anybody an enemy of another on the watch of a loving and all superior creator? Or I guess the definition of love would be in order here. How is God a loving being as you admit he is a monster who tortures for not living life for him, and his truth being hardcore?
If I commanded followers of this program to die, would that make me a monster?
Yeah, because you're not God, right?
Listen to yourself.
How does God's being validate such malicious behavior? Why do you approve of such behavior of anybody? How does that make you moral? God's will and word applies to everybody, meaning everybody is subject to it as it carries a consequence, while this isn't about social behavior, but submitting to this God. We are all born against our will, so there is no escaping this truth if it is so. If it is a reality, we all need to reject God and just accept that perpetual consequence because this religion is about pleasing God and not how we behave toward each other, which means that it actually has nothing to do with morality.
It would be deserving of punishment. But I'm going to hold a completely separate set of standards in my head for this God. So because why though? Because why? Because they might protect you? Because you're afraid of them? For what conceivable reason are you holding to standards that you yourself are admittedly saying are disgusting and abhorrent?
Yeah. Well, it's because he deserves it. He's God. He's the creator of everything.
What does God deserving have to do with Shannon's question of you holding to your own admittedly disgusting and abhorrent standard? Why does God deserve human obedience and worship?
Created me.
That's not. He deserves.
No, he didn't create you. First of all, you don't.
Actually, no. God only created Adam and Eve. Everybody after Adam and Eve's time in the Garden of Eden is the result of their disobedience. Regardless, how is God, having created you, a valid reason to uphold your standard?